Hello friends. So today we are going to discuss a problem in economics, in microeconomics, where we are given that supply curve of a product is highly inelastic, and it is also given that the demand curve of the product is highly elastic. Right. So let us first intuitively, graphically, both ways understand what does it mean, what kind of good it could be. So let me take you to the standard supply demand graph on which we express price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. This is the standard supply demand graph. So this is price, this is quantity. So what happens if it is a normal good? If it is a normal good, you will have this kind of a supply curve uh, and a downward sloping normal, the demand curve. So this is the demand curve in case of a normal good, and this is a supply curve. And here the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity will be settled in the market. Now, what is given in this problem is little different. What it says is that let us again draw that the supply curve is highly uh, uh, inelastic. What does that mean? So this means that this particular graph, which was like 45-degree slope, upward slope of the supply curve, now this particular graph is going to become uh, is little uh, flatter. This kind of graph. Sorry. This will be little steeper. Uh, this kind of supply curve. This will be little steeper. What does that mean? Inelastic means it means that you may change price whatever you want. You may charge price this, you may charge price higher than this, you may charge price even higher than this, even higher than this. But the the quantity demanded is not going to change much. The slope is high of supply curve. That means even though the price is changing a lot, the quantity demanded is not changing. So what could be example of such good? For example, nuclear power plant. So if tomorrow, in case of a normal good, what happens? Tomorrow, if you are giving me 10 rupees more for that product, I will supply more. But in case of nuclear power, even if you give me 10,000 rupees more, I cannot just install another nuclear power plant and supply. So my quantity will not increase much in comparison to the increase in price. So this is a supply curve of an inelastic. Now what else is given is that the demand curve is relatively inelastic. What is elastic? What does that mean? That means demand curve is now flatter. That means the demand curve is downward sloping, but not, sorry, uh, let me draw it with a pen. The demand curve now is not 45-degree kind of sloping, but something like this. Something like this. So this is the demand curve now. This is the demand curve. Okay. So what does that mean? If you increase or decrease price even a little, the quantity change will be higher. If you increase the price a little, the quantity demanded will reduce a lot. If you increase if you decrease the price, the quantity demanded will increase a lot. So this is the highly elastic demand curve. It is flatter than the normal demand curve, and the highly inelastic supply curve is steeper than the normal supply curve. So now what happens? So this is a case, and let us assume that with the green ink, I am showing that this is the equilibrium price and quantity. So this is equilibrium, Q equilibrium, and the price equilibrium. Now what happens? This equilibrium is disturbed at this point. P is the equilibrium being made. Now this equilibrium is getting disturbed. Why it is getting disturbed? Because the government has imposed a tax. Now we know that whenever a tax is imposed, there's nothing that happens to the nothing that happens to the demand curve. Only the supply curve shifts. Whenever a tax is imposed, only the supply curve shifts. Now, what does it mean? The supply curve is going to shift leftwards. Supply curve is going to shift leftwards whenever a tax is imposed. So this supply curve is going to shift here like this. You can see the supply curve has shifted leftwards. Why the supply curve will shift leftward? Because now at the same price, I will supply a lesser quantity because I am giving tax to the government on that. So now how much is the tax levied? So 60 rupees is the total tax levied. So now what happens? Supply curve has shifted here. So the equilibrium point now will be P dash and Q dash and Q dash. Now what has happened here is at this price, I am paying 60 rupees tax also. I am selling it to the customer also. So what exactly has happened is, suppose this is the tax, total tax given. 60 rupees tax is being given to the government. Now, who bears this tax? So earlier, this was the price, P was the price. So suppose, let us say this distance is 10 and this distance is 50. This distance is 50. Now what happens? Out of these 60 rupees, only 10 rupees the consumer is paying, is a burden on the consumer. 50 rupees is the burden on the seller. So 10 rupees is a burden on the buyer, 50 rupees is a burden on the seller, right? Because seller's demand is relatively inelastic, highly inelastic, but the buyer's seller's supply curve is inelastic, but the buyer's demand curve is highly elastic. So the tax incidence will be more on seller. So seller will pay rupees say 50, for example. Exactly, it will depend upon the curve, which is not given in the question, and the buyer will pay rupees 10 10 to the 10 as his contribution of the tax, because giving rupees 10 more, he reduces his supply to this, but at this at this price, now the quantity supplied actually earlier, as per earlier curve, is this much only. This much is the quantity supplied. Now where this much money is going? This much money from the supplier's pocket is going. So customer has paid 60 rupees more. Customer has paid 10 rupees more, but remaining 50 rupees of the tax will come from the pocket of the seller, right? So if you just see that this was my earlier supply curve, I was selling, say, price of the good was 100 rupees. I was selling 100 units of that particular quantity. Now, since I am paying 50 rupees tax, I will sell much a little lower quantity. Say I will sell only 80 numbers of that particular product, while the price that is being paid has increased to 110, because 10 rupees I am taking from the customer, because this is his demand curve. Consumer can move only along his demand curve. He is not going to change his demand curve for the tax levy, because he knows this is my demand. You charge me this price, I will buy, say, 200 units. If you charge me this price, I will buy only 100 units. So buyer is going to move along the demand curve only, but the supplier will have to shift his supply curve leftward in case the tax is incident. So the question that is being asked here is, if if a tax is levied for rupees say 60, then the effective price received by seller will decrease by, so it will not decrease by 60. It will decrease by 60 if it was perfect inelastic kind of a curve, but it is not perfectly inelastic curve, it is highly elastic curve. But it will not decrease by less than 30 also, because it will be more than 30 and and less than 60. So the answer here is more than 30 and less than 60. So the four options given are how much will sellers price received will decrease. So sellers received price means selling price minus tax. Selling price minus tax. So somewhere say 40 rupees is what the seller is going to receive, because 20 he has, so say 40 rupees less he will be receiving, because somewhere like 40 he has paid as tax and 20 remaining tax is coming from the buyer, right? Let me reiterate the problem. Suppose the original price was rupees 100. Now tax levied is equal to 60 rupees, and because of that tax levied, the the price of the good has become say rupees 120. So what does that mean? Buyer will pay rupees 120 to the seller, but seller will pay 60 rupees to the government as tax. So what will come to the seller is just 60 rupees. What does that mean? Earlier, the without tax, the seller was receiving 100 rupees. Now he's receiving only 60 rupees. So how much is the reduction? Reduction is the 40 rupees ka reduction for the seller that he received, because there was no tax earlier. So he got 100 rupees. Now there is tax. He is getting only 60 rupees. He's getting 60 rupees, but the tax is not 60. Tax is not just 40 rupees, tax is 60. So who is paying the remaining tax? So remaining tax is being paid by the 20 is being paid by the buyer. 20 is being paid by the buyer. So what does it mean? That it means the if the demand curve is highly elastic and the supply curve is highly inelastic, seller bears most of tax burden. If it was that the demand curve is highly uh, elastic and supply curve is perfectly inelastic. So what does that mean? So the perfectly inelastic curve will be like this. I will supply the same nuclear power whatever price you pay to me. So this is a supply curve, and the demand curve will be something like this only. Right. So what happens if you impose tax of 60 rupees? Entire 60 rupees will be paid by the seller. So in case the supply curve is inelastic, more inelastic, then tax burden is mostly on the seller. Here, this is the case given in the question. So the answer is C. Somewhere between 30 to 60 is the price money actually received by that particular seller, right? So uh, um, uh, uh, so what kind of goods are which are highly elastic in demand? Highly elastic in demand are luxury goods, and highly inelastic in supply, they are like nuclear power, very specific products, very few products in the market, right? Thank you.